Massachusetts Peace Action webinar. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Pentagon spending, police militarization, and Congress. And we're here with Stephen Semler, who's the founder of SPRI, the Security Policy Reform Institute, which is a think tank, but it's a little different than your average think tank because SPRI is grassroots funded. And they deal mostly with U.S. foreign policy, but they are working to provide an infrastructure for the development of progressive U.S. foreign policy and national security ideas that break with the ideology of the existing think tank community, as we said. So we're going to be joined, we are joined with the founder of SPRI, Stephen Semler, whose work has looked at the correlation between the military-industrial complex, their campaign contributions, and how those contributions affect the people in Congress and how they vote, especially on the Pentagon budget. So tonight we're going to be talking about the proposed Pentagon budget increase, and also Joe Biden's continued support of the 1033 program, the militarization of U.S. police, sending them things like military vehicles, military aircraft, assault weapons that I'm sure many of us are familiar with, that really make police forces, local police departments look like occupying forces. And we're going to talk about the reason why that is, and also the effects that has on local populations. So if I could ask for people to please just mute themselves if you're not speaking. First, we're going to hear a little bit from Stephen about SPRI and the work that they do, and then we're going to open it up for your questions and really spend a lot of time answering your questions. So please do think of questions that you can ask, and you can either put them in the chat and I'll read them off for you, or you can raise your hand by hitting the participants button at the bottom of your screen and then clicking raise hand. And if you do that, then I will call on you and put you up on the screen, and you can ask your question for Stephen live. So welcome, Stephen. Thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. And I guess to tee you off, can you just tell us a little bit about SPRI and the work that you all do there, the Security Policy Reform Institute?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. And Brian, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for that kind introduction as well. My think tank is designed to basically align U.S. foreign policy with working class interests. So what that means is instead of taking the nation as the centerpiece of evaluation, we take the working class in the United States and our working class peers abroad. And we design policies and we promote policies to align U.S. foreign policy with those working class interests. So obviously, you know, cutting back on militarism and the budgets that support it are obviously a part of it, but we'd also, to us, that's not enough, because stopping something bad that's happening isn't quite what we're after. So we're always looking to shift funding from militarized budgets to more productive ones instead. Whether we're talking about the federal budget and shifting it from the Department of Defense to, say, the Department of Energy for climate initiatives, or for that. But we also do work on the local level when it comes, especially when it comes to police militarization. We're all for instituting the same sort of logical framework on a local level, where we're shifting resources away from police and towards more socially productive accounts that actually improve people's well-being. So, you know, to that end, we do write long form policy papers and we do engage with Congress. However, a lot of our work is sort of what you'll experience tonight. We try to be as best allies we can with activists, an activist group. Because I was saying earlier before the call, it's like without activists, without people on the ground doing real work, doing organizing, calling the representatives, we anti-imperialists are sort of not not in a great position, because we're always going to be outmatched in terms of funding, but we do have people. And I, just to wrap this introduction up, I hope to be as best ally as I can, be the best ally I can when it comes to engaging with activists, whether that's providing talking points or providing data, and doing it in a sort of a user-friendly way where policies that are ostensibly complex can be distilled into, let's say, a chart in a couple paragraphs. So not only will you be able to explain it confidently, maybe an unusual observer of US foreign policy or police brutality may come on, may spark their interest because it's a short read, it's a light read. So yeah, the goal is to create good policy, and the goal is to help activists make their lives a little bit easier when it comes to recruiting people and pushing for system level change.
Yeah, and I'm particularly interested that your think tank is trying to get our security policy to align with the interests of the working class. I think that is a very interesting and actually unique take. Can you talk a little bit more about that? About the position of working class people as to military budgets, endless war, militarism, and can you talk a little bit about the opinion polls around that and how you feel that affects policy?
I think the public opinion polls show, well, they do show widespread support, regardless of party affiliation, for reducing the Pentagon budget. So it sort of adds credence to our methodology when it comes to situating foreign policy as fundamentally a question about class. Because in Congress, I mean, just look at, for example, we'll take Mark Pocan's amendment over the summer, which sought to reduce Pentagon spending by 10%. 0 Republicans in Congress voted for it, but 50% of Republicans, just sort of in the general public, according to polling, they supported it. And on the Democratic side, I mean, we got, a significant number of votes, but not nearly enough. But for the broader public, Democratic leaning voters, 69% supported it. So, even if the House and the Senate were almost completely dominated by Republicans, and it comes down to, members of Congress not expressing the wills, you're not expressing majority will. It comes down to elite consensus rather than majority opinion and majority wishes. And part of the reason, there's multiple reasons, institutional factors as well, but part of the reason is that we aren't paid by military contractors like members of Congress are. So some of the research that I'm sure we'll touch on later, I'll just give a small preview. Members of Congress, among Democrats, who will take the same example with the Mark Pocan amendment that sought to reduce Pentagon spending by 10% or $74 billion. Members of Congress who voted no, who voted against it, took on average over 3 times as much cash from military contractors as those who voted no. And I mean, there's a similar sort of correlation when it comes to, there was another amendment introduced by Representative Ilhan Omar from Minnesota that sought to remove US military presence in Afghanistan within 1 year. And there's another similar correlation to that. It was close to twice as much members of Congress who voted to continue US presence took twice as much as their peers. So, that's one aspect that majorly skews public opinion. It just comes down to cash, which is stuff we already know. We already kind of assume that, but it's good to have a number behind it. And what I'm working on now is sort of to kind of build that out into popular discourse, because everyone hates corrupt politicians. Everyone hates that. but I think, you know, that part, when it comes to military spending for various reasons, you know, the influence of military contractors gets left out, at least compared to, you know, other sectors.
Yeah, and it does seem like common sense that if a politician is taking money from companies that depend on ever increasing military budgets, that will affect how they vote in Congress. And it seems like common sense. I think that is something that almost everyone would agree with. But it's good to have someone who's putting those numbers together so you can prove it very easily and very quickly. Um, just to talk a little bit about the recent proposal by the Biden administration to actually increase defense spending. I think a lot of us were pleased with the Democratic Party platform that came out after their convention last year, where they were actually talking about being able to do defense for less and cutting waste. That was something that the Democratic Party agreed on, put in their platform. And then I think there's a lot of disappointment, and rightfully so, that the president has now proposed at this time, especially a time of economic downturn and the pandemic, of course, that they're actually going to increase the defense budget. Do you expect Congress to go along with this? Do you expect them to increase Pentagon spending from this proposal, as we've seen in the past? And what do you think allows them to do this, despite the fact that they're violating their own platform and going against public opinion?
Statistics aren't really in our favor with this one. It turns out I compared every presidential budget request, the amount that the president requested for the Pentagon, and compared it to how much was enacted by Congress in the end. And it turns out there's, you know, on average, Congress tends to add about 11 or $12 billion to the presidential request to the Pentagon budget per year. So, but, you know, that doesn't mean it'll happen this year. It sort of depends. The outlook and the prospects for this year sort of depend on what the Progressive Caucus does and how closely the Progressive Caucus, as sort of a unit, as a legislative unit and sort of a political organization, resembles the Defense Spending Reduction Caucus, and what members, which high profile members the Defense Spending Reduction Caucus can attract and can reach a whole hell of a lot more people than we have now. So it really depends on sort of how progressives organize themselves. Right now, I don't think we have the votes, but there could be an opportunity to, through various forms, to hold up the defense budget, not allow it to pass. So as long as most of the Progressive Caucus remains unified and Republicans follow through on their solemn obligation to obstruct every single piece of legislation that there is. One thing about, just one really quick point, I looked at the votes for every military budget during the Trump administration, and Republicans voted against Trump's military budgets more often than Democrats did. So you can't really predict when Democrats will vote against a military budget, but they will. They have it in them. And I hope that by popularizing the narrative that sort of, members of Congress are rewarded, effectively paid to, vote on the military budget, to vote for, increasing military budgets. I hope that narrative takes hold, and I hope, the next time Republican leadership demands that their members sort of fall in line, I hope there's, a block of them who maybe don't take as much or any cash from the military industrial complex say, no. I mean, I've lived, maybe get in touch with vague libertarian tendencies and reject the military budget, say it's too high. But the future is uncertain, but all we can do is sort of organize and mobilize as best we can to pressure our representatives and try different things, whether it's moral appeals, whether it's sort of the corruption appeal that I was talking about, sort of a name and shame thing, or whether we're talking about sort of, let's not continue Trump's legacy. I see a chart up on the screen now where, when Obama left office, the last NDAA, the NDA is it sets the overall spending limits for how much you could spend on the military. Obama's last one authorized 610 billion. Trump increased it by like 130 billion, and then Biden then follows Trump with another 12 or 12 and a half or whatever. So it's sort of one of these things where we have to like really pressure the administration, members of Congress, to reject sort of continuing Trump's legacy on this. And as much talk that Biden made about aligning U.S. foreign policy with the climate imperatives, with putting the climate change on equal footing in terms of other national security concerns, we have to make it clear to the administration that the money hasn't followed the rhetoric. So I think that's really our best path forward with kind of an uncertain and oftentimes backwards Congress when it comes to voting.
Yeah, and I want to thank you for putting this chart together. We did get this from SPRI, and I think it's important to put things clearly, because if you hear the rhetoric from Joe Biden and Donald Trump, they would both have you believe that they couldn't be any more different. But if you look at this chart, it's clear to see that this proposal from the Biden administration does not represent a major departure from Trump's military spending policy. This is pretty clearly a continuation of that policy. Now, the NDAA is something that we work a lot on here at Massachusetts Peace Action. I'm almost positive that everyone on the call has probably heard us talk about it already. I was particularly interested in something that you wrote about really focusing in on those votes, because we were very proud in our congressional advocacy that we got 8 out of 9 of our members of the House of Representatives to vote for that Pocan amendment to cut $74 billion, 10% from the military budget. But of course, when that did not make it into the final bill, after the conference between the Democratic House and the Republican Senate, we lost a lot of those votes. A lot of those members that had voted for the 10% cut and for the Afghanistan withdrawal went ahead and voted for the bill anyway, despite the fact that those had been stripped away in conference. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that makes it a little harder to track those votes. Which do you feel is more important? And do you feel that that's sort of a strategy to vote for something that won't be in the final bill, for instance?
I think it's important to make it clear to the representatives that their votes mean something from a normative stance. So even if it doesn't play out the way you want legislatively, the act of voting matters. So when Ayanna Pressley, votes the right way on both those amendments you talked about, then rejects the military budget, she's for real. And that, it matters in a significant sense to her. And therefore, because she does it and because of her profile and because she is who she is as a legislator and as far as we can tell as a person, it matters. It suddenly starts to matter to a lot of other people. So those are the type of, I get it. You lost a few members when it came down to, ultimately voting on the final bill. No, I think you hold out. I think it's a good way to sort of, distinguish the the progressives from, the ones who would like to come off as progressive, and one of the things is, like, if you support, withdrawing from Afghanistan, it doesn't make it, and you vote for it anyway, you're voting for a budget that continues the presence in Afghanistan, and if you're not voting, if you vote for a decrease through an amendment, then vote for the final one, you're by default voting for an increase. So you're just coming off as hypocritical. Um, I'm in favor of introducing as many amendments as possible, to an extent, as many progressive amendments as possible to the NDAA. Trying like hell to get them in, and standing by them, because if this thing's gonna pass, it needs to do something productive. If Ilhan Omar's amendment would have passed, that would have been something that we could have lived with. Having the Afghanistan withdrawal decision out of Biden's hands and out of Trump's hands before he left office. I think that was something that was really positive. I don't think, even if both Pocon's and Omar's amendments would have been included, I don't think you would have voted for it. I think you fight like hell to get those things in, and kind of reject it anyway at the end, unless there's a sort of a major victory scored. But for the most part, I think what y'all did was fine. And Massachusetts, in terms of states, always performs the best. I mean, you lost some members of the House, but your senators held firm. They didn't get their wishes with the Sanders amendment. They didn't have a equivalent to an Omar amendment, but they voted for Sanders' amendment, which did the same thing as Pocan's. It didn't win. It didn't get included, and they rejected the military budget. So that's the kind of thing we're looking for, to really say, like, no, this is a deal breaker.
And we actually had another, very interesting and unusual wrinkle in the last NDAA, and that is that former President Trump decided to veto the bill because of some social media reasons, and also more of a cultural issue. This idea that Confederate bases would be renamed. So we actually saw an override of a president's veto on the NDAA, and we saw more Democrats actually vote for a bloated Pentagon budget than Republicans. And personally, I heard members of Congress say that I didn't want to increase the military budget, but we had to get that provision in where we renamed bases in this moment. That sounded like a bogus excuse to me, personally. What is your take on that? Because I think a lot of people use that talking point.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a purpose. I think there will be a lot of those types of provisions to make war, more user friendly in that way, or have an appeal, or sort of rename bases from, a Confederate general to maybe a prominent Native American, which is in some ways more offensive. But there will be those sort of amendments that make it in. I think, or will be proposed by centrist Democrats to sort of greenwash or pinkwash or whatever wash, what comes down to what it, ultimately what the bill does is fund empire and war by default. So it's one of those things where that kind of thing is only useful if it gets Republicans to vote against it, in which case that helps us. Because the more Republicans vote against it, the less Democrats it takes to hold it up, to hold the whole defense bill up. So I kind of view them, I'm hoping, it's not, renaming, bases, doing that sort of thing, or, any sort of provision related to, say, allowing transgender people in the military. I support that. it's not like I disagree with those, progressive policies. It's just what I care about is what the budget does, and what I want to do to the budget is make it not pass in its current form. So I think I really think that it depends on how we use it, but I reject any sort of form of greenwashing or pinkwashing or any sort of sanitation from what it is. But if we can make it work for us in sort of a strategic sense, then let the centrist Democrats have their day.
We oppose that as well, Stephen. I just want to be clear, and we see it for what it is. It's sort of present it as sort of like Neil Young said, a kinder, gentler machine gun hand. Right. It's
good quote there.
It's like you said, to woke wash it. I think is a new term that's been floating around. So a good segue from that is you've done a lot of work on the militarization of police. And obviously, in the last year, we saw some of the biggest demonstrations and biggest protests against police violence in the history of our nation. And Joe Biden claimed to be the candidate who was going to make some serious reforms. Not as much as some of the activists wanted, but certainly a lot more than we would see under President Donald Trump. But now he has come under criticism from groups like Black Lives Matter for a continuation of this policy of sending military equipment to police departments. Can you talk a little bit about your work there, about what you found in your research?
As far as this is just sort of as with the military budget, Biden is kind of just building off of Trump's legacy, really, and just sort of continuing. We're still living in sort of an oversight sense. We're still living in Trump's America when it comes to the flow of military equipment to police. 1033 program isn't the only thing, but it is the one that I think it's so prominent, and it sort of reflects empire. It is sort of like, war will cycle back. Militarism always sort of circles back to the homeland. 1033 is, I think, one of the most explicit versions of that. And upon entering office, I don't know if this was in I see the screen sharing now, but upon entering office, Biden was expected to sign an executive order on January 26th. So like 6 days after he entered office, or maybe 5, whatever. He had different themed days, and the 26th was Equity Day, in which case he would sign a bunch of executive orders regarding private prisons, which he did. But he was also, like, and the press was reporting on it too, he was supposed to sign one that sort of brought back Obama era restrictions. And as you can tell from the graph, if your viewers are looking at, if they're able to, after Ferguson, Obama instituted an executive order that placed some restrictions on what equipment could be sent from the Pentagon to police. This was actually, as far as sort of like a structural framework goes, it was actually pretty cool, because what it does is, by prohibiting equipment, it makes it categorized as surplus. And under the language of the 1033 program statute, surplus equipment must be returned to the Pentagon. So, from this executive order, police returned a couple hundred tracked armored vehicles. They returned some grenade launchers. They returned some bayonets. But most of the stuff that Obama included as prohibited items were prohibited already. And he didn't include, like, the main sort of hallmark, keystone items that are affiliated with the 1033 program: assault rifles, the MRAPs, those highly helicopters, those highly visible sort of items. So really, my expectation was that Biden would bring those back, and then advocacy would at least have a jumping off point to say, oh no, you can just add just a few more items, and then kind of just like fight over the months, the weeks and months to get him to expand that provision. Come January 6th, he doesn't do shit. So we're left, thinking like, okay, what happened? And I did some research, and it turns out this really powerful. It's a police union, but it's like an association of unions. They lobby. The bottom line is that this police union lobbies, and they essentially, I found them, in a press release, kind of gloating that they had, had direct lines with the White House Domestic Policy Council, and high-ranking officials within the Department of Justice, in the Biden White House, and basically talked the White House out of bringing back these really kind of largely ineffective or kind of milquetoast restrictions. So now it's like the Biden White House isn't even like willing to go back to where Obama was on this. It's like, come on. So there's some items floating around Congress. Hank Johnson, he introduced, as part of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, he included the language from his Stop Militarizing Police Act, which he has introduced every year since 2014. It's never come to pass. Representative Nydia Velázquez, next week or the week after, will introduce legislation that will will terminate the program entirely. But sort of as activists push for those things through Congress, there has to be sort of a continued push to the Biden administration to say, hey, you can effectively shut this program down just by adding material to the prohibited list, by adding different pieces of military equipment to the prohibited list to force police to give them back. So he could, we're talking billions of dollars worth of equipment that, he doesn't need Congress to, eventually, Congress to officially terminate the program, you need Congress to abolish the statute. But Biden can basically strike the program dead whenever he wants, but he hasn't.
Yeah, and I'm glad you put it that way, because you oftentimes hear a lot of excuses from politicians, even the president, reasons why they can't do things. But I think ultimately it comes down to a question of political courage. And the reason why he didn't sign that bill, or sign that executive order rather, on January 26th is because he didn't prioritize it, because he didn't want to, ultimately. But you've done some writing about, I would like to hear a bit more on Hank Johnson's initiative, because there are some major parts of it that would actually go beyond this sort of milquetoast change and do some real structural change. Can you talk a little bit more about that in detail, Stephen?
Yeah, of course. As far as sort of like what makes Rep. Johnson's Stop Militarizing Policing Act bill really good is that Biden could effectively take that language and make it into an executive order, and that would pretty much shut down the program. But it does so in a very clever, kind of not discreet or obvious, trying to hide anything. But the language is really effective. That's sort of the language that we are trying to get Biden to adopt, and Rep. Johnson too. His office organized a letter with a bunch of other members of Congress saying that, basically, please just adopt the language in my bill into an executive order, and we'll continue to work, move my bill through Congress. But Biden hasn't responded to that. But overall, I think the way it's talked about it's stated, it's like modest. It comes across as very modest, but as far as like, because it says it places restrictions on only certain or some military equipment and not all. No, it's actually a pretty aggressive piece of legislation. It's something that I think he should be proud of, and not undersell it. Or, I mean, because the people who signed on to the letter anyway are people who would support repealing the program entirely. So I think that's something that could end up as an amendment to the NDAA, something like Hank Johnson's. If we don't get our wish with full repeal, that's, again, that'll be introduced by Nydia Velasquez. I think this Hank Johnson's bill, regardless if it's an amendment or standalone bill or amendment to NDA or the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, it's worth fighting for. I think it's good.
Yeah, thanks. I guess this sort of applies to both the Pentagon budget and the militarization of police, and this is a bit more on the politics of it. We all know that that Joe Biden won the presidency by millions of votes, if you go by the popular vote, but by my math, he is only president because of 42,000 votes, a combination of votes in Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin. So his margin of victory was incredibly narrow. And yet, this African Americans who, by and large, voted for President Biden and support these reforms to the militarization of police. What's the risk of losing those voters, of folks just staying home next time around? And what's the political calculus in the president's mind and in the mind of his advisors that he thinks he can spurn his base on this?
So your guess is as good as mine. I mean, there overall, sort of the level of enthusiasm for whether it's sort of broadly popular policies that involve the spending of money, or stopping very unpopular policies like militarization of police, bombing Syria illegally, dragging your feet on the Afghanistan withdrawal, spending tons on the military budget. It's overall, the administration is acting as if they won in a landslide. I don't, my opinion is that they got extremely lucky. Just with not necessarily, I'm not calling, the pandemic in any sort of way a blessing at all. But with mail-in voting, I think that saved Biden. I think without it, he would have lost. I don't think people, like, as you said, with your statistic there, I don't think enough people realize how close that election was. And we're talking about an utter disaster of a human being in Donald Trump, almost winning again. So overall, I think, I mean, I don't want to push the narrative of like we need to save the Democratic Party, but because I want it to be for us, and our brothers and sisters abroad and here who may not look like us, but I want to push broadly, popular policies, because they're good in and of themselves, but they need to be pushed for extra hard. If I'm fine with talking people into it as saying, no, this stuff will work. This stuff will make sure that people who went out last time will go out again, and the people who didn't cast votes at all, that maybe they see something worth fighting for, and something positive, and something different, and something a policy that would go away under a Republican administration that's really good and helpful to them. And the statistics show, like I advise congressional candidates on foreign policy, particularly those primarying not great Democrats. And I, just sort of being in that world for a bit, even though it's kind of just getting started in it, you come across like studies that really show that, yeah, it's better off, candidates are better off even in sort of like swing districts. They're better off, drifting left in terms of being vocal supporters of, social spending, and policies that just reduce, the hassle and the shittiness of everyday life, that take worries off your mind, whether it's dealing with another insurance company as you're bouncing around contract to contract. I'm speaking of Medicare for all, of course, but there's this illusion that in order to win swing districts, you got to veer towards the center. No, I don't really know any centrists. If you press people, they'll say they're independent, they'll say they're centrist, but they really sort of fall on either side very clearly, or some weird mix of both, where they may be, socially conservative and, may not have much in common with them, but they do agree that, politics, the orientation of politics should be to help out working people primarily, and to make life just like less difficult and less annoying,
Yeah, I know what you mean, Stephen. And we saw this right after the election. Especially, there were a lot of members of the Democratic Party having to explain why it was so much closer than they thought it was going to be, and why they actually lost seats in the House. And it sort of gets back to this idea of sort of like it's venerating moderation. You heard people like Jim Clyburn, the House Whip, come out and say that the reason why they lost seats was people saying that they wanted to defund the police, or that too many people wanted Medicare for all, and that scared away a type of voters. And led to the election being much more closer, and the House majority narrowing. I don't think that was actually, in fact, I know that was not borne out by the actual statistics. If you looked at how people who supported Medicare for all did in those elections. But I think this gets back to the importance of the narrative. And why establishment figures in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party think that going right towards the middle instead of aligning yourself with the interests of the working class is the way to go.
Right.
But I want to give our audience a chance to ask you some questions. I see a hand up, and just to let people know, depending on what version of Zoom you have, your raise hand is either under the participants button or under reactions. But I see we have a question on the phone from 1847 number. Can you go ahead with your question?
Yeah, hi, Jake here. I'm in Chicago. Thank you for doing this. Sorry I came in a little bit late, but anyway, you said earlier that in the during the Trump administration, there are more Republicans who voted against Trump's military budget than Democrats. Why? Can you hear me?
Good question. Yeah. I was thinking, because it's a good question. I appreciate you joining in. It's always a good time to join a good party, so I'm all for it. The difference. First off, the difference wasn't that extreme. It was Democrats voted for Trump's military budgets over 4 years, 78% of the time, and Republicans voted for it 76% of the time. Generally Republicans are better at falling in line. I don't really have a clear explanation for you of why sort of Republicans sort of edged out. But I will tell you, just so I don't sort of leave you empty-handed on this question. As with Democrats, the Republicans who tended to vote like more than once against military budgets, Trump's military budgets, they also didn't take nearly as much cash from military contractors as Democrats. So regardless of whether you're looking at Republicans, Democrats, if you're looking as an advocate, if you're looking to win votes and kind of like, with limited resources and limited time, you want to see who takes, who among each party takes, a low amount of cash from military contractors. So sorry, I don't have a good answer for you, man, but I appreciate you joining in.
Thanks, Stephen. I'll take one from the chat. This is from Robin Harper, who says that if Biden tries big military cuts, Republicans will attack fiercely and will take back the House because of military contracts in every state. Military, I guess he's saying that military contracts, contractors spread it out so they have jobs in every state. Can you just reaction to Robin's comment there?
I don't buy it as sort of a defense for Biden maintaining radically high levels of military spending. There's multiple ways to sort of there is blowback when it comes to that, and Robin's right when it comes to highlighting that concern. I think it's legitimate, especially because when you look at the distribution of companies across the United States, and they're kind of spread out in a strategic way, that it's basically what we're seeing is effectively a socialized, nationalized, publicly run system that still has sort of corporate interests hanging on, because most of the money that funds this whole structure comes from the government. So I think a narrative that can be floated is that by converting funds from the military to green energy, you could show off that 42% more jobs would be created by investing in clean energy and infrastructure rather than investing in defense. So there is sort of a grass is greener type of thing going on. And the second reason is it's more of a money thing. If you look at sort of the maps of like F-35s, you do see like a lot of 1,000 jobs or 10,000 jobs or 25,000 jobs here. The first thing to remember is those numbers are routinely inflated. And the second is if you go down to like sort of a district level, you'll run into some districts that are sort of dominated by military contracts, but others you won't. And they will have a couple hundred jobs. Their power is magnified by their union presence, by other people who are kind of not interested in politics, and who are maybe don't have the means to take a day off work and vote. But largely, I think it's about campaign contributions. I think the jobs thing, it's real, it's legitimate concern, but I think it's sort of rhetorical cover for the real sort of driver of votes and keeping bad members of Congress in office. And I think it's mostly about the money. So I think if Biden challenges it, I think you'll be surprised on just how many members of Congress who are good, who voted for it, who end up, kind of hanging on to their seats.
Thanks, Stephen. Lynn just raised an interesting point in the chat. We often hear that progressives are challenging the Biden administration too much, not giving him enough credit, and are therefore undermining him. But just recently, we have heard Hillary Clinton come out with some very serious criticism of President Biden for his plan to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. What do you make of this? She really didn't hold back in her criticism. She did say that there would be major consequences, for ending America's longest war, which is very popular and is also something that the president ran on. What do you make of that attack from within his own party?
I think it's okay to sort of support Biden in this, tell him good job and kind of be a reaffirming voice, and you can be stern in other areas too. I I mean, I think this comes down to just sort of just elite figures. Like with cutting the military budget, like the public opinion polls I cited earlier, where it showed like massive public approval for it, but within Congress, like not much approval at all for it. Same deal with withdrawing from Iraq and Afghanistan. And I do sort of, Hillary Clinton isn't the most credible voice when it comes to this. Same sort of thing when I saw, Michelle Flournoy, who is a candidate for Biden's Secretary of Defense, say that it was a terrible decision as well. Flournoy lost her job as Undersecretary of Defense because she supported the surge in Afghanistan, and it turned out to be a total disaster. And she's still syndicated in foreign affairs, So it's sort of one of these things where, it is about sort of elite discourse, and also a bit of self-preservation too. Because I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if President Obama former President Obama came out and said, this is a bad decision as well. It's just about protecting legacies, because both, you're not just sort of, by withdrawing from Afghanistan, you're taking a shot at their legitimacy by both of them sort of being cheerleaders for continuing, the war effort there. The last thing I'll say about this will be a small autobiographical point, but there's no point in trying to talk these, so-called experts into, believing a certain way. There are experts worth listening to, and I read, standard think tank reports. I read people who have good information. But overall, the best way to sort of combat that sort of critique, coming from people like Hillary Clinton, who have, woke up on third base and thinks she hit a triple, or I guess that's more Chelsea Clinton. But the best way to do is have kind of a reaction like Cole's, which sort of warmed my heart a bit with a little chortle, little laugh there, and also just to help out organizations like yours, get involved with your community, because you could spend time refuting bullshit, but it's also a really good use of time kind of trying to build something new, because frankly, we're at the point now where she does have massive influence, but she's only one vote when it comes right down to it.
Yeah, I think that's a really refreshing answer. And and what you just said about Michelle Flournoy continuing to be her opinion continuing to matter, right? She's still syndicated in foreign affairs. It reminds me of all those journalists who were so wrong about the Iraq War and weapons of mass destruction, and it seems that you can be wrong a million times as long as you're wrong and you share the opinion of the establishment.
Right, right, and that's one of the one things. Just real quickly here, I don't mean to interrupt you.
No, sorry, no, go ahead.
It's crazy, once you get to those elite levels, and when I say elite, I don't necessarily mean conspiratorial. I mean like sort of the like elite sort of establishment. I mean, just by definition, it's just groups of people, mostly men, who know each other, who just sort of get along, and there's sort of standard praxis, and they're sort of insulated from consequence. Whereas for me, that chart you pulled up a few minutes ago, I agonized for an extremely long time making sure those numbers are right, because if I get shit on, I'm not shielded from accountability in that way. It just like, and I'm not making regardless of you're talking about a grassroots think tank like my business is, or being an activist group like y'all are. There's just you have to just be right all the time, or you're subject to sort of just being smeared. By being off by a few billion, you get smeared and delegitimized on these grounds, even though you're doing it in the right spirit.
I see Mary Ellen has a question. Mary Ellen, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, thanks.
Up on the screen.
Here. So yeah, I just want to get your comments about what's happening in Rhode Island. I live close to Rhode Island, and I work with a group there that recently met with Jack Reed, who's the chair of Senate Armed Services Committee, and also White House. And he's a real tough nut to crack. When he was pressed about the Pentagon budget, people were urging him to consider a 10% cut. He just held the line on what he expects to be a budget that would be a flattening of that budget. I guess he was invoking the pandemic curve or something. He was asked to, take a pledge, I think a code pink pledge, to swear off funds from weapons manufacturers. And he, calmly said, well, he's thought about it very, very, very carefully, and he always thinks he does the best thing for the country. It doesn't influence him. But I would actually argue that all of the Rhode Island congressional delegation is really difficult. And he in particular, Reed, but all of them are all over the media touting jobs as military jobs, and those go to very well-paid workers in the state. So I was just wondering if you have any comments about that. What your thoughts are.
I appreciate you fighting that fight, first of all. And, I think the true competitive spirit is, one who's willing to, lay it all out there and give a really good effort, knowing that it might not be good enough to secure the outcome you're looking for. So, talk about the story of, anti-imperial activists. For, Jack Reed takes the most money from military contractors in the Senate, at least among Democrats, if not Republicans, which I'm sure you're aware of. What I will say is that continue to work with, sort of state reps and, within sort of the state and local government to add pressure from sort of a grassroots level. There's some really, I forget the names, there's some really good representatives in the Rhode Island State House who have introduced some really cool pieces of legislation regarding, there's one on climate change and there's one on reducing the military budget. I submitted testimony for both.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I'm talking about?
Exactly. Yeah. There was part of the group, some of the group was testifying themselves, and yeah, it's actually a very encouraging work.
Yeah, I heard about it from.
See how far it goes. So.
Yeah, I understand that, but I heard it from Brown War Watch, the student group there, whom I love. So I think doing that is really important, but also, I think it's a really good jumping off point if you're able to highlight how much he takes. I don't think you'll talk him out of it. I don't think you'll necessarily change his ways at all. But our job is to win votes, not to sort of change his mind. So I think if he believes that he's doing the best for the country, which I don't buy, I think he's doing the best for what he believes will win him the next election. That's sort of not particular to Jack Reed, but just sort of how I approach politicians generally. So if doing everything you can to sort of make him feel the heat and show that he thinks this is about, he says military creates jobs, then you can sort of pull up, start sort of an advocacy campaign or sort of write an op-ed that shows investments in military spending creates jobs, but literally investing in anything else does it way better, and it would create far more jobs for Rhode Islanders. And you could also point out, I think divesting, that was another one of those state house where it's divesting, Rhode Island public funds from military contractors. That's really helpful too, because it demonizes companies who have the hubris to sort of advertise everywhere. The newsletters I read in the morning, it's like a fever dream of Lockheed, Raytheon, General Dynamics. So, I think it's about building political power and showing them that, this will have consequences. But keeping in mind that, even if you don't really win here, you're doing something that others are keeping track of, and people in other states will pick up on. So, just keep fighting the good fight. I mean, we can talk later about, specifics if you want, but I want to encourage you. And the most important thing is to keep doing and trying different things.
Thank you. I just have one follow-up question. What's the best place to find out about the donations of politicians? Is open secrets, or do you do your own research, or where do you go? Where do you
I
like
read
to go?
I read as much sort of original material as I can, but I use open secrets a lot, and I think they're wonderful. I mean, without it, it saves me a lot. It saves me like a hell of a lot of time. One thing I'm working on now is to not just, I just updated, I go on Open Secrets and I sort of I have a spreadsheet on my own, and I sort of, I update every member. And I just got done with, finishing 2020. One thing I meant to do, but I forgot, was to not only calculate how much they get from military contractors, but sort of figure out what percent of their total campaign revenue comes from military contractors. So that's something I think I should probably get around to publishing soon, because Open Secrets is it's really good, but if you want to look at sort of broad group at a time, you have to like look for what you're looking for, if that makes sense. I think it's probably on me and my my think tank to publish that stuff too. So, but Open Secrets is good.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why we're excited about SPRI and your work is that you make these things digestible and easy for people to process and use. So just thank you for being a resource. And don't worry, Mary Ellen is definitely going to keep fighting. There's no doubt about that. But just another concern that I want to express is, the fact that people are for shrinking the Pentagon budget, and let's put it in perspective. I think the Pentagon budget right now is at the level of the height of the Vietnam War, when the U.S. had some 500,000 troops in Southeast Asia. That's the level of spending that we're talking about here. It really is out of control and obscene and absurd. But at the when Joe Biden came into office, he thought he could get away with, and I guess he has, picking as defense secretary someone who stepped right off of the board of Raytheon Technologies. One of the leading beneficiaries of increased military spending. What makes them think that they can get away with this? Just flying in the face of public opinion and this conflict of interest really right out in the open.
The Austin pick, I mean, I thought we were kind of just fucked either way. I think
Flournoy
he was the least.
Flournoy was probably worse. I agree.
Yeah, and I think, I know I said this to Code Pink too, because they were really opposed to the Flournoy nomination. When it turned out to be Austin, I was actually on a webinar with them like right before that we were supposed to talk about Flournoy, and I said, like, congratulations, like you scored a victory here. But that was like one of those victories where it's meaningful, it does something, but there's still work to be done when you're getting down to the the system level issue where there's not only corruption at play, but it's just sort of so out in the open and obvious that they're just sort of betting on there not being a huge backlash, which for me, it's like, it sort of highlights the importance of, and why I was so excited at the beginning, before we got this call started, when, I heard y'all were getting sort of more defund the police stuff, as you're doing with, the Pentagon budget, converting it to more useful purposes. You're doing the same thing with police. It's all about building allies. And, again, corruption in politics is sort of widely understood, but military spending, due to various reasons, due to the prestige of the U.S. military as an institution, due to just a lot of things happening at once, and maybe people not recognizing it, how important this stuff is. I think the more we sort of branch out as anti-imperialists, helping justice, helping climate activists, the more we can sort of say, oh, you're fighting big energy and how they corrupt politicians. Well, yeah, check out our fight going on too. But showing that you care about them, you're trying to make yourself useful. And same thing for police unions too. They have enormous, not necessarily at the federal level in terms of like cash flow. At the local level and state level, though, they have a hell of a lot of money, and they lobby quite well at the federal level, as I've come to realize, unfortunately. But no, I think branching out and sort of showing that we have a lot in common with our fight, what we're trying to do, and our values. Where I hope it's sort of at the point where it's sort of the whole of the progressive movement, regardless of whether you're primary and anti-imperialist or not, where there's just sort of like an understood natural flow. There's still communication between groups, but it's just sort of a matter of course that there's going to be collaborations at different points in the year, whenever it's sort of convenient for each cause.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if we have if we're going to win this fight, then our motto has to be solidarity.
Yeah,
I think that is perhaps the most important thing, that we support each other. Those that are working for peace or climate justice, racial justice, healthcare justice, economic justice. The only way we have a chance at winning is if we support each other in solidarity. Cole has put up in the chat a lot of actions that you can take. And I know he also has a question. So I'll turn the mic over to Cole Harrison, who is our executive director here at Mass Peace Action.
Yeah, thanks. Great talk, Stephen. Appreciate it so much. There are two theories in the peace movement about why the U.S. spends so much money on its military that I've heard. One of them is that the military-industrial complex sort of has this institutional stronghold, controls Congress. It just kind of has wormed its way into the system, and it can continue, getting more and more contracts every year. The second theory is that the U.S. empire requires world domination in order to continue what it's doing, so that it's not so much the military-industrial complex as Apple and whoever's Apple and Exxon, whoever the major industries of the country are that require world domination, and therefore has to resist even a small country like Venezuela or Iran or whoever wants to leave the international system or international capitalist system, that they have to be controlled if necessary by force. So, between these two theories, and I guess you on your website, you have you propose an alternative approach to foreign policy. So I wonder if you could tell which of these two theories you think has more truth in it and how we can envision a different future.
I think both sound legit to me. The one I know more about and the one I work in is sort of more of the first one. Part of that again is just sort of there's better people to talk about, capitalism than me. I just know a hell of a lot about, defense budget, legislation surrounding it, militarism. I'm totally cool with, advocates working both sides. I enjoy reading as much as I can with that. But as far as, I think as far as advocacy is concerned, like what stands out to me is just focusing on that first one. on that first one where we're talking about, like, you can talk about empire, but I think empire, just because the way that, you know, military contractors receive revenue, then fund not only politicians, but they fund like literature, like, you know, think tank reports, you know, media, advertisement. It's just everywhere. So, you know, I think you can really put military industry as sort of the nexus, and the central focal point on what needs to be divested, what needs to be critiqued, stigmatized, and ultimately defunded, to sort of realign foreign policy to wind down empire. Because I mean, the way I view it, and I'm not saying that's a complete, you know, look at it or anything, but I think it's pretty good. And when, you know, one last point, I apologize for this, I'm essentially stuttering here, but I think one last point is that if you focus on the budget and really kind of make that sort of your central organizing principle, and maybe not, you know, paying attention to different, you know, the AUMF, for example. What I tell like sort of newcomers to, you know, the anti-imperialist or anti-war scene, I think the main thing that separates being anti-war from anti-imperialist is the vote on the budget. Because you can try to legislate your way out of, you know, endless war, but and you might have sort of like sporadic victories or piecemeal victories, but it's not like, you know, these military blunders of the 21st century, you know, fell out of the sky. It came out of an imperial architecture. And what gives empire life on a functional level, like the bases, what enables, you know, ships and planes and whatever to, you know, pass in between and sort of maintain this global, you know, posture, is money. Budget gives empire life. So I think, you know, I will preference that first one just because it's closer, I think, and it offers a more coherent sort of vision for advocates. But again, I mean, I'm cool with all explanations, really. You know, I'm here to learn. But as far as, you know, I found it simpler to explain it in terms of like, okay, what's useful for advocates, or what's most easily digestible for sort of unusual observers to U.S. foreign policy. I apologize for the answer, Cole. That's probably my weakest one so far.
Not at
That's
all.
a tough question. Cole, while you're up on the screen, can you tell the folks a little bit about the actions that you just put in the chat?
Okay, I got 3 actions for you. I put them in the chat. Let's see here. The first one is an action page to cut military spending. You know, plain vanilla. Stop funding war and militarism. Invest in our communities. Goes through all the facts. It's put on by a whole bunch of organizations, of which Mass Peace Action is one. So go out and send that to your member of Congress. Second, we've got an organizational sign-on letter, which calls on progressive legislators to take a stand on this and essentially to vote no on the defense budget and promise ahead of time to do so. So this is a strategy to try to put some backbone in a greater number of legislators. This is an organizational sign-on letter. So if you're part of an organization, take a look. There's already a number of organizations that have signed on. So if you're a part of an organization, have them sign on to this. And the third is just for City of Boston residents. This is a call to shift funds from police to civilian agencies. This was actually put together by Dorchester People of Peace, one of our colleague groups in the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston. And it's just a letter to the mayor and city council. They're working on next year's budget. So that's our 3 actions that we have for you tonight, and hope you will take a minute to do those. I'll just throw them in the chat one more time. That way it's easy to click on the links and you can go ahead and fill them out while we're finishing up the conversation.
Thanks, Cole. And while we're just letting people know about things that they can do as well, if people are particularly interested in the revolving door between military contractors and Pentagon officials, on Friday at 6 p.m., we are going to be talking to the editor of Covert Action magazine, Jeremy Kuzmarov, who recently wrote an article about General Austin, now Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, and his connections with Raytheon Technologies, as well as the amount of money that has been awarded to that company just in the first few months of the Biden administration. It's something like $2.5 billion. So we're going to be talking a little bit more with Jeremy about the problem of military contractors and government officials, just that revolving door. So I'll put that link up in the chat, as well as send a link and a follow-up email to you, and everyone will get a follow-up email with the actions, with some of Stephen's articles, as well as a recording of this program. And we encourage everyone to spread it around to your contacts who couldn't be here live. I just want to ask you, Stephen, before we finish up here, what is the best way for people listening to support SPRI? You say you're a grassroots organization. How can people find and support your work?
Securityreform.org is our website. On Twitter, it's at security_reform. Our funding website will hopefully have other options up soon, but you can find us on Patreon, which is a monthly subscription service. You can donate any amount you want. It's sort of a recurring payment thing, or just do it for 1 month and cut it off. It's patreon.com/SPRI. I'll type that in. And then Twitter is at security_reform. Sharing our work helps. We'll hopefully have a new article out soon about one of the items that one of the questions that Brian brought up this evening about sort of Biden's combat versus climate budget, to hopefully lay it out there, lay the jobs argument for converting from military to green energy in there too. And God willing, it'll be a short article, very user friendly, and have some important information in there that you can kind of pull out and keep on file for your next mass peace action, legislative action. Because really, I said this before the program, I really want SPRI to not only, or SPRI, you can pronounce either. I really want us to, not only do the traditional think tank thing of develop good policy, meet with members of Congress, because I think that's great. But I also want to be engaged with the public, and being engaged with really capable, movements, organizations like Mass Peace Action. I hope this chat is sort of like, step and, building on the relationship a bit. And I hope you all sort of hear more of my name, because I'm being useful to y'all.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, Stephen. And yeah, just let me say thank you, because these are just, not to use a militaristic analogy, but what you're providing, these articles, these statistics, these charts, they're arrows in our quiver for us to make change. So we really do appreciate it. And this is hopefully only the first of many times we'll be talking. And we're very interested to see that new piece. Please do share it with us when it comes out, that comparison of military spending to climate spending. I think that's going to be very, very useful for a lot of our activists and volunteers. Is there anything else in the pipeline that you want to let our folks know about right now?
There'll be, I hope to have like an article out just sort of comparing how much the US spends on police and corrections versus how much other countries spend on their militaries. Because the US spends a lot of money, as we all know, projecting force outwards through the federal budget, but also in the federal budget, like if you look at Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, if you look at those accounts that support police and incarceration, you have the 5th highest military budget in the world. And if you take in state and local, how much state and local governments in the US collectively spend on police, that amount would be the 3rd highest military budget in the world, behind the US and China. And if you took, finally, if you took in how much US state and local governments spend on corrections, which is mostly incarceration, that would be the 4th highest military budget in the world in terms of dollar amount. So one of the things is that this is not only a problem in and of itself, but also if, say for instance, if this money was needed, something had gone terribly wrong. So it means that there's a failure of some other policy. And I think I keep myself motivated in sort of thinking that the good news is that at the end of the day, these are public funds, whether we're talking about state and local government or federal government, that can be wrestled away if we have enough people. So again, I'm really thankful for y'all, what y'all do. I was thrilled to come on here. Yeah, keep me apprised of what y'all are up to, because you guys move fast and you do a lot of stuff, but I hope to kind of, get in the flow of what advocacy is doing, so I can, back it up with some, some stats, some charts, just doing my, little piece as much as I can at the moment. But to all the viewers who joined tonight, thank you for joining and also for supporting Mass Peace Action.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for being an ally. I really look forward to that piece comparing police and law enforcement and the spending that goes into the carceral state to foreign militaries. I think that's a very interesting angle that has not been explored and will really turn some heads. So I'm really looking forward to that, and hopefully we can have you back on to talk about it when that article drops. But I just want to thank everyone for attending tonight, and encourage everyone to please check out Stephen's think tank, check out SPRI, and support this work, because this is incredibly important. And do take those actions, and watch out for your in your inboxes. We will be sending you a recording of this and a lot of helpful links, and please do share them around. We really appreciate it, and it helps. So check us out on YouTube, and subscribe, and also consider becoming a member of Massachusetts Peace Action. We're a grassroots organization. Just like SPRI is, we depend on members and volunteers to really drive the work. So we'll be including a link where you can join us as a member and support our work through donations. So thank you, Stephen, and thank you everyone for coming tonight, and we will see you all soon. Have a fantastic evening.
Bye, everyone. Thanks again. Appreciate you, Brian. Appreciate you, Cole.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen.
Cheers.
Good night, everyone.